Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the A Time to Heal podcast. I am Dr. Rani Samuel, and today I'm going to speak about healing the hidden pain of abortion. I'm presenting this primarily from everything that I've experienced in my therapeutic practice, as well as from friends and colleagues that I know outside my practice. When I was reflecting on this topic and trying to consider when I first learned about abortion, when I first understood what it entailed and what people go through, I was taken back to my childhood. I grew up in a small coastal town along the Indian Ocean in South Africa. The experience of growing up in a small town leaves you with a touch of innocence about your childhood. I would say a touch because years later, I came to understand the many difficult histories of the families that I grew up with, and even people I went to school with, and the many challenges they faced, which in the innocence of childhood, you know very little about. So to study, I had to leave the small coastal town and go to a city, which was where the university was located. And I lived at a women's residence at university. And it was with probably about 250 young women that came from all over South Africa. And that was when I became aware, face to face, of the pain, suffering, and torment of abortion that many of these women in residence and some on campus that went through. It was not only the young women that were traumatized, but it was their partners that were also traumatized by the experience. We have the stereotype of the young man simply not bothered and moving on. But I assure you, in many of these cases, we had very supportive young men who felt helpless and out of the reach of parents for guidance and support. Many of them went on to complete their studies, both the men and the women, traumatized by abortion, and became successful in their fields. But there was a personal undoing in their lives that manifested in cycles years and years later. After university, I entered my internship, and then I was given another insight into the painful world of abortion for women. In my internship, it was almost compulsory to attend a monthly meeting, and in the diary, it was always indicated as a top meeting in capital letters, TOP. And I never really understood what that was when I started my internship. What was a top meeting? Well, a top meeting was the termination of pregnancy meeting. So what is a termination of pregnancy meeting? Well, it was a monthly meeting that was attended by gynecologists, psychologists, psychiatrists, and other medical staff that would make decisions about who qualifies for a medical abortion. I remember as a young 20-something novice intern feeling extremely anxious and uncomfortable every time I saw this in the diary. Why? Why was I anxious? surely this was another of my clinical duties as an intern. Well, everything in me that went before that, and that is my experiences in the women's residence, and looking at the journeys of what some of my close friends had to go through, I realized that I did not want to be part of such a meeting. At some level, I felt incompetent. I really didn't know what was expected of me, and I felt that this was too big a decision for me to give my input into. And I considered all the ways I could avoid such a meeting, and even resorting to praying on the day and saying, well, I hope there's nobody on the list because I don't want to go. Fortunately for me, I never had to attend a single meeting, so my prayers were definitely answered, because I never felt that I should have a seat at that table. When I opened my clinical practice, I started to see, once again, a different picture of the struggles and the pain and the suffering, and especially the long-term suffering of women and men who had abortion inflict or even just touch their lives. And many people, when they would first come, they would avoid the topic altogether. But I understood something about the post-traumatic stress that people who have undergone such a procedure go through. In many articles and in many circles, I know that abortion is promoted as a risk-free procedure, that it doesn't touch you, that it's something you could do in the morning and proceed with your life by the afternoon. I wish it was that simple. I was thinking about the fact that none of us enjoy going to the dentist. We hate having our mouth cavities invaded. We hate the numbing agent of the local anesthetic. And it's even far worse when they say, well, you need a root canal or you need an extraction. And it's traumatic for many people. I know I don't enjoy it, and we often wait until it's an emergency to actually go to the dentist surgery. And I was thinking, especially of a root canal procedure, how painful it is, how it just keeps on getting reinfected until you deal with it. And it came to my mind that abortion is a birth canal procedure, and what is involved is an extraction, and how painful that is, and what residue is left. It may not be physical, but it's definitely emotional, and it definitely has mental health residue that must be addressed. In my clinical practice, I have women that are highly educated and leaders in their fields who struggle with mental health issues, where depression and anxiety is the order of the day. And when I often take detailed early histories, I often find that when they were just post-school and in their early 20s, quite often from a first relationship that ended up being abusive at times, that is when they fell pregnant. And often far away from home, often isolated, ashamed, unable to tell their parents anything, that is when they opted for an abortion. And all they did was heal from that physically and move on. But when we take these histories, the pain and the suffering and the lifelong wound of an abortion comes to the fore in my therapeutic practice. You see, time only hides and conceals the wound. Time does not heal the wound. Healing and the journey of healing reveals the wound. It lets the light in and brings relief and wholeness as you make peace and as you grieve and do the difficult things necessary. To many women and men, they have endured the emotional pain sometimes for decades, and it's a real burden. And the burden of concealment is even greater. When young men and women go through the painful process of abortion, a young woman has become a mother. The young man has become a father. And they go through this particular process, and then they have to bury it and never talk about it again. As with any trauma, it refuses to be buried or denied. It will one day come to the fore. But most times it's like water that runs under a bridge. It's always there, even though it may be ignored. This is quite a vast topic, and I can't do it justice in a single podcast. So I am considering writing something more in depth on this topic, and especially from a healing point of view. Not intellectual, not political, but for the healing of those that seek healing in this area. Today, I want to share a story of one of my patients, Jessica, who had a lifelong struggle with this matter, and it shaped her journey. And more than anything, she wanted emotional freedom, healing, and wholeness. Jessica is an esteemed pediatrician, and she came to see me after a lackluster 20 years of marriage, where there was lots of infidelity, and she really was struggling with leaving the marriage and wanting a divorce. Her husband was also a very popular pediatrician, and they shared a practice together in two different parts of the province that I live in. Interestingly, they never met during the week, and they would only meet on weekends because both practices were thriving, and they had two homes and had to live in two different cities. When she came to see me, she was clearly depressed because all she really wanted to do was sleep a lot of the time. She had immense fatigue, and it was a real struggle for her to manage a full day of work. As I listened to Jessica's story, she told me how in the first year of marriage, and I think within the first 6 weeks of marriage, she fell pregnant. So she was married, they had a home, they were both qualified doctors, but her husband did not want the child. He said it's too early, that they are just not prepared, and financially they could be in a better position. It's interesting to know that sometimes an abortion is carried out on a baby that's wanted. So what happened next? And very reluctantly, Jessica agreed to the abortion. And she recalls the coldness and the absolute hygienic smell of sanitizer. When she went to the clinic, she was dropped off by her husband and fetched again. And for many years thereafter, there was no talk about this. But she felt abandoned. She felt isolated and alone. And she told me about the absolute pain and terror, as much as it was a clinical place that she went to. but she said she will never forget the smell. And she began to have post-traumatic stress for years to come. Post-traumatic stress has never been really associated with abortion. You know, we've seen it in other traumas of life. But what she had, the flashbacks, the nightmares, the sound of a baby crying, the feeling of being punished for taking a life, she was consumed by this. And that abortion set a tone for a very distant, detached marital relationship. There was silence, there was no intimacy, and this couple just kept growing apart in every way possible. Interestingly, Jessica and her husband were pregnant again a year later, and their daughter was born. Yet, in her mind, she always questioned that she had in fact given up a son, and she knew it was a son. They did divorce, and we had to go through the pain of that healing journey, because 20 years later, she would always talk about the turning point that brought about the slow erosion of the marriage, that in fact it had started with the abortion. Jessica had a meditation room at home, and she's a Hindu, and it was also what she called her prayer room. And she told me something so heartbreaking, and she said every morning she would go there and pray to the deities, asking for daily forgiveness for what she had gone through years ago. And it's interesting, she told me, I've done this routinely for 20 years. You see, abortion is a death experience for many of my patients, and it has to be therapeutically treated as a significant loss. So there has to be grieving and mourning, and we do this for as long as it takes. The one thing that I've discovered over the years, if I ask a woman or a man, what was going to be the name of your child? They can actually tell me because they have thought about it. One of the comforts to men and women who struggle with this type of loss is making them understand the spiritual process of healing. You see, a child, born, unborn, stillborn, has a spirit, soul, and a body. And as much as the body has died, the spirit and soul continue to exist outside the physical form. So, biblically speaking, the spirit and soul is indestructible. And that child's spirit is something we start talking about because it's indestructible. So as much as the child no longer exists on earth, that child, from a biblical point of view, does exist in God. And many people in my practice would ask me, is there forgiveness for what I have done? Have I committed the unforgivable sin? Many of you may know that the word sin means missing the mark. It's an archery term, so it's an arrow that misses the mark. And for these particular patients, they had felt that they missed the mark. But abortion is not an unforgivable sin. It's something you can heal from, and it's something that you can reach a point where you can receive forgiveness for the mistakes made, and healing and wholeness. I find that the story of David in the Bible brings a lot of comfort to people that walk this path. Because in it, David lost a baby because of his history, because of being part of the murder of the husband, because he was wanting to have a relationship with the wife. And he had missed the mark terribly. And part of his consequence was that a child was going to be taken away. And what he said, and you can go and explore the story in greater depth, what he said is, I will go to him, but he will not return to me. So it's almost like spiritually there's a reunion at some point in time. The baby spirit is well in God. Another verse that does bring relief is found in Psalms 27:10, where it says, though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. This is something that also brings comfort and relief, because the parents of this unborn child want to know that the child's spirit is well. And here again, we can see what is biblically recorded about it. In terms of Jessica's journey, we spent a lot of time in grief work, a lot of healing and emotional release. And when we got to the later stages of her healing, we made it tangible, because she loved gardening, and we planted a garden outside her kitchen window. And I remember her going to a very exotic nursery and choosing a very unique flower that she placed in a pot, and she put that outside the window. And she told me every time she sees it, it brings her such joy, because now there's a tangible expression of the significant loss. So this flower, which blossoms, and she sends me pictures of it, radiates healing, radiates joy, which is now seen in Jessica's own life. If you know anyone that's gone through this, or maybe you've gone through it yourself, man or woman, know that healing for this pain and suffering does not have to be a lifelong wound. There is a process of healing. It's a grief process. There's forgiveness, and there's wholeness available to you. Thank you for listening. I will see you next time.